Yep.
Eric, if you record to the cloud, then you can pull it back later.
Okay. Well, I may need to edit it. That's the only thing. Let's see. I wonder where it's recording.
Okay, while Eric's doing that, one other bit of housekeeping is we did a kind of dry run with Bob Cutter in his presentation, and what we came up with is Bob will do about 4 or 5 slides and then stop and ask questions. So what we're going to do, I'm going to mute everybody as Bob does his presentation, and when he stops, we'll unmute those that have questions. So if you have questions or you want to make a comment, we can all do it together. Go down to your participants window, and Bob L, you described this good. So would you describe how to raise your hand?
You talking to me or Bob Cutter?
No, I'm sorry, you Bob. You Bob.
Okay.
Bob L.
Okay, if you go down to your where you have your list of people, of participants, you click participants, then you get this list of everybody who's participating in this Zoom session, and on the bottom far right corner, this is for Win 10 people. Okay, you're running Windows. It says raise hand. So when you click on raise hand, if you look at where I am, it raises my hand by my name, okay? Which is not real easy to see here.
Fingers.
Let's see, where am I?
Should be at the top.
Oh,
since
there.
we're speaking.
Well, let's see.
Did you click on it?
Yeah, I clicked on it because it says
You can search.
lower hand.
Raise hand,
Okay.
lower hand.
Bob, you're in, Sue. You're logged in as Sue.
Yeah, it's got Sue with a little blue hand up.
Logged in as Sue.
Well, if we don't get it
I still don't see the
electronically,
sign.
we'll do something that's weird. We'll raise our hand physically. So
Yeah.
we'll
Well, Jess,
Where
if anybody's on
I just see it.
if anybody's on an iPad, it's a different, it's in a different place. It's to the right of the participant list. It's 3 dots. And if you click the 3 dots, you get in that window, you can raise or lower your hand. And so that's a little different on an iPad.
Okay, well, if you can raise your hand electronically, that would be great. If not, we'll do an old-fashioned kind of thing and go along. So we'll figure it out. It's kind of new to us, so we'll figure it out as we go along. Eric, are you ready for recording?
He's recording already, I think.
Yeah, I'm recording now, so we're
Oh,
good.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other housekeeping items before we go? Okay, then Clark, with your permission, I'll give it over to Bob Cutter and he can start his presentation.
You got my permission.
Away we go. Bob Cutter is yours.
we all did.
Sue.
Okay.
Bob Cutter?
Yeah. Hang on. All right, there we go. I'm going to first. We don't have a video. I somehow got confused on which camera was which, and so we're okay. Does everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna try to remember to use my courtroom voice, but if I drop it or lose it, somebody shout out to me. First of all, I'm really pleased to see Don and Phil on. I haven't seen them on here and haven't seen them for a long time, so I'm really glad about that. And as an old ham radio teacher, I'm really pleased to see Heather, Sue, and Stephen, 3 of my old students who were successful, and we won't talk about the percentage of successful students I had. But anyway, it was good to see that. Also, I really miss Ken and Betty's donuts, but I guess that's the way things have got to be. Okay, first of all, this is not my. These are not my slides. These were prepared by Paul Harden, NA5N. Paul is an old friend of mine who worked at the Very Large Array down in Socorro, New Mexico. Some of you, Jerry, I remember, and others have visited that and enjoyed it. I first met Paul when I went down there and took a tour. So that's where these come from. And I heard this presentation at Albuquerque a few years ago, and so decided I wanted to share it and got Paul's permission. So that's where we are anyway. Okay, let me see. What do we got here? Not getting... Okay, let's see what we got. Let's go back and do something else. All right. Please stand by.
That's right.
Okay, you got it now? There we go. All right. All right, here we go. We got back to where we are. Anyway, what we want to do is to kind of review some history and also the history of early wireless as it relates to the maritime service, which is really where it started out. And of course, we're going to feature on the Titanic because it plays a very, very crucial, significant role in the history of radio communications and at least shipboard communication. SOS to MGY. MGY was the call letters of the RMS Titanic, Royal Mail Ship Titanic, that we all know somewhat about, and Leonardo DiCaprio did some amazing things, and we'll talk about those later on. Before wireless, any tragedy at sea pretty well went without notice, and probably the most significant one and lost to sea is the Mary Celeste, who was disappeared in 1876. Some of you may have heard about this. This is sometimes referred to as the ghost ship and everything else. The Mary Celeste departed New York City for Genoa, Italy, and it was lost. It had a cargo of 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. We're going from North America to Italy carrying alcohol. I think of something about coal to Newcastle, but that may not be applicable. Anyway, it was discovered by another person, another ship, on December 7th, 1872, off the coast of the Azores, and the ship was under partial sail. It had not been wrecked. It was completely, there was nobody on board, and all 1,500 or 1,700 barrels of alcohol were still there. It's still a mystery. Nobody knew what happened to it or anything else. But anyway, the point being that without radio communication and the maritime communication, the Titanic may well have been the same sort of situation. In other words, a ship lost at sea and we wouldn't know anything about it. The Titanic set sail from New York City April 17th of 1912. Now, looking at this timeline, you'll see that the Marconi system was actually started in 1901 when he made his first transatlantic contact between basically Nova Scotia, I believe, and Ireland. Telefunken company came shortly after that, and we amateurs started building wireless stations in 1906. So you can see that we were in from the very beginning. the early telecommunication systems were subscription services, which is very, very significant, as we'll discuss later on, because there are basically two systems, the Marconi system and the Telefunken system, and they were very strong competitors. As of 1910, U.S. passenger ships had to carry wireless, and by 1911, over 1,000 U.S. ships had wireless. The 1911, the Olympic, which was a sister ship of the Titanic, was launched, and it was the first ship to have a radio room built in as part of the ship. Many of the other earlier ships had what was basically an outhouse attached to the back of the bridge, and as some believe that is the origin of the term Radio Shack came from. In other words, these add-on systems that were put onto the existing ship. Now, for those of you with a technical bent, here is a schematic of Marconi's patent drawing for his spark gap transmitter. And basically what it is a series of amplification systems that show that the purpose was to build up a sufficiently enough voltage to jump a spark gap and create a transmission. Here's an example of one of the early Radio Shacks that we see here. This is probably from the early 1912, perhaps before the Marconi, before the Titanic was launched. They were transmitting, or they were concentrating on 500 kilohertz or the 600 meter band. They also monitored to some extent at the 1000 kilohertz band or the 380 meter band. The early maritime wireless here's an example of it. The Mauretania and Lusitania were launched, or were launched in 1906, and added a radio room in 1907. This is actually a photograph of the Titanic radio one. It's the only known radio photograph of it, and it's a double exposure. If you'll look at it, you'll see some ghost images in here, and the reason for that was that the photographer was an Irish priest, and as any good priest, he was carrying on maybe he had some of those 1,700 barrels with that the Mary Celeste lost. But anyway, he forgot to wind the film between exposures, between the Radio Shack and whatever he took place, or vice versa, and hence the reason for the double exposure and what we see in there. Let's take a break at this point and use Jess's suggestion and see if there's any questions. Jess, go ahead.
I think a lot of people are muted, so we'll just go through. I see Pat has his hand up. Go ahead, Pat.
Just a comment, Bob, at least on my end, you're way, Bob, this is Bob Cutter, you're way overdriving your mic. It's really, really loud here.
Turn it down, Pat.
Okay, Pat, we looked at this, and Mike, Bob Cutter adjusted his mic, so I think we have to bear with him and turn down our microphones and our volume, because we were working with this. Bob Cutter?
Well, let me back off. How is this? Is this better, Pat?
Yeah, that's an improvement. Thank you. I'm sorry to be a griper.
No, you're not. I was yelling to the back row in the jury box.
I understand. Once an attorney, always an attorney.
Okay, I'll leave it at this level. Go ahead.
Richard, you have your hand up.
Yeah, it was just a question about where were all these ships launched from?
I didn't hear that.
I say, where were these ships launched from? Were they all out of Belfast?
The Titanic, I don't know about the Lusitania and the Mauretania. They were primarily English ships. The Titanic, of course, was built in Ireland, so I suspect it did come out of Belfast. But as far as the others, I'm not sure about.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bob.
Bob Cutter, I have a question. How much power were they running in these radio rooms back then?
They estimated that there was 500 kilowatts, 5 kW was the spark, which was really, they did the shore stations were running more power than that, but that seemed to be about what the shipboard stations at this time ran.
100 kW, holy cow.
Larry Wood, you have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, penetrate issues. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. I believe it's the 113th anniversary of the Titanic sinking sometime soon, or as this week, whatever. Go ahead.
I think that's true. I worked a special events station a couple of years ago that they were broadcasting from both Ireland and somewhere in the United States, and got a commemorative card. So it's 100 plus anyway.
Okay, we have, I'm going to steal from Clark, and we have one other person who joined us. Ted, can you hear us down in the bot? Can you hear us, Ted?
Yes, I do.
Ted, we're going around. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll give it back to Bob Cutter.
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, we can.
This is Ted, Kilo Echo Zero, Utah Foxtrot, Oscar in Carbondale, checking in. It's been a while, guys. Hi, everyone.
Good to see you in here. Good morning to you. Bob
I've been
Cutter,
practicing for the extra exam, as Ken and Dennis will tell you. They've been my Elmers with this endeavor.
Very good. Good to see you in here. Bob Cutter, back to you.
Okay, thank you. While we've got this slide up, let's talk about the Lusitania a little bit and how it relates to ham radio and everything else. We're going to talk later about the Telefunken station that it was in the United States, and the Lusitania took off or left New York in 1915. Shortly after the beginning of the First World War. Hams reported strange transmissions and also detailed ship arrival and departure on the Telefunken station in New York. And shortly after that, the Lusitania was sunk by a German U-boat off the coast of Ireland, which resulted in the United States joining the Second World War. So again, we've got wireless, we've got hams involved. We'll also talk a little bit about the fact that hams really weren't viewed with very much impression. We didn't make a very good impression on the pros early on, prior to this Lusitania tragedy. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Okay, more trivia between the Titanic is always depicted with 4 smokestacks and with them belching forth. The picture on the left is actually the Olympic, which was a sister ship of the Titanic that was launched 6 months earlier. And this is a picture of it shortly after it was launched, with, as you can see, all 4 stacks going, and then the artist depiction of the Titanic on the right with all 4 stacks going. The reason, well, first of all, the Titanic did not use 4 stacks. It only needed 3 stacks to vent its boilers. But the Lusitania, the competition at the time, the fastest ship traveling the Atlantic in 5 days, and the Titanic was built basically to take that record away from it. And so they had 4 stacks on the Titanic just to show that it was every bit as powerful as the Lusitania. However, the forward stack was never used for smoke. It was used for ventilation and ventilation and storage. So you have a little bit of advertising trivia, or however you want to look at it. Here is a look of now going back a bit, the Olympic and the Titanic, sister ships, both built within 6 months of each other, were the first ships built that had built-in radio rooms. Before, they were a tack-on, an add-on, an outhouse. You remember we talked earlier that maybe that's where the term Radio Shack came from. But anyway, here is we only had that one picture of the Radio Shack, the double exposure we looked at earlier, of the actual Radio Shack of the Titanic. This is the sister ship Olympic, which was basically the same ship, and everything else was pretty much the same. That, Richard, for you, it indicates that the Olympic is leaving Southampton, so that may be where both of those took off from. I'm not sure.
Right.
Here's just a kind of a historical review of what Radio Shacks looked like over the period of time. 1920s, first vacuum tube radio gear. 1940s to the 1960s, we have a phenomenon that took place in a lot of industries. Men went to war, women were needed, women became merchant marine radio officers. Before that time, they were referred to as radio men because they were all male. And starting in the 40s, women were discovered to be every bit as good, if not better, with Morse code and handling these matters. And they pretty much became a mainstay of the merchant marine as the year passed on. Now, we should point out that the merchant marine during the Titanic time, well, there was no such a thing. The radio operators were employees, in the case of the Titanic, of the Marconi Company. They were not employees of the steamship line, the Cunard line, but rather were employees of Marconi. And they were compensated to a great extent from the fees that they charged for sending and receiving the telegrams, so that the steamship company didn't have any expense other than the installation of the equipment, but didn't have any expense. So they were not actually ship officers, they were Marconi employees. Here again is another shot of the double exposure that the Irishman made, the Irish priest that we talked about, and then the recreation of the Titanic the Titanic radio room that's in the British Maritime Museum. I'm sure Richard's seen that, and he may want to comment about it as we go on. Okay, what were things like in 1912? We already mentioned that the radio operators were employees. Wireless communication was not regulated. It was the Wild West. I mean, whoever had the loudest signal or the most distinctive or the worst signal, they got through. There was no FCC. Everything, as far as the commercial was concerned, was by subscription. And Marconi and Telefunken were competitors. And in 1912, both companies, Marconi and Telefunken, prohibited their operators from talking to the opposition, from talking to the competition. And this will be significant as we get further on into the actual time of the crash or the collision of the Titanic with the iceberg. Marconi wanted to be the radio supply company, if you will, but they just couldn't break into the terrestrial communication system. The railroad and Western Union really had an excellent system. We could relay messages from one coast to the other in a matter of minutes through Western Union and the railroads. So Marconi was pretty much limited to the maritime arena or the maritime market. here's an example of what the wireless system in Europe looked like in 1912. And here you see the Marconi stations in maroon, the French in green, and the Telefunken in red. Probably the only reason that Telefunken didn't make it into France was that the French and the Germans weren't getting along particularly well at that time. So the French used Marconi equipment, but they were not actually Marconi stations owned by Marconi, kind of a in between and everything else. And as you see, they all had separate call signs. There was no particular system to them at that time, and you'll notice that even all the Marconi stations did not begin with M. We have Finian Island in the north of Scotland, which has the call letter of FNL, where the rest of them begin with a mic. Let's take a break here and Jess, see if there's any questions.
One bit of interest, Chris and Heather were putting out some information as you went along on chat. So if everybody down on the bottom of your screen, for those who are on the PCs, to the left of the green box, there's a chat feature. And Chris and Heather, do you want to comment real quick on the chat?
Sure. We just looked up on, we Googled where the Lusitania and Mauretania had launched from. So we just provided that information.
Very nice. Thank both of you for that. That's a little extra feature that we can have in Zoom, so that's good. Pat, your hand is up again. Was that from last time or another question?
Yeah, that's because I can't figure out how to take it down now. Sorry.
Okay, I'll put it down for you. Any other questions, thoughts, comments?
I've got a quick one. Am I muted?
Please go.
Yeah, just a comment. I must admit, when I used to go across the English Channel by ferry over to France, I just become a radio ham, and I was very keen to see the radio room on board the ship. And the radio officer would say, you know, it's wonderful. Nobody ever asked to see me. They all want to see the bridge. So he was quite pleased. And years later, I went one of these transatlantic cruises. I asked if I could go and see the radio room on board the cruise ship. They said, we don't have radio rooms or radio officers anymore. He said, we've got satellite. just a comment.
All right. Bob, I have a comment. A couple of slides back, you had that the spark gap were prohibited. Was that to prevent fire?
It was, but it was viewed by a lot of the old time maritime people and the old time ship owners as something very close to witchcraft, and they didn't have very much confidence in that. We're going to talk about that in a minute because we have actually a concrete example of that we'll talk about after the Titanic hits the iceberg.
All right. Any more comments? Any other? And again, Chris and Heather, thank you for the chat. Any other comments? Bob Cutter, back to you.
With Chris here, I had the very, very haunting feeling that I'm that professor that's lecturing to young Sheldon about physics. Those of you who are a fan of the Young Sheldon, the spinoff of Big Bang Theory, will know what I'm talking about. Anyway, here's what it looked like on the west end of the Atlantic Ocean. Remember, at this time there was very, very little actual commercial traffic in the Pacific. I mean, that's not to say there wasn't traffic, but it wasn't the scheduled thing. It wasn't the regular thing that the Atlantic had. And the Atlantic was where the market was. The Atlantic was what Marconi, that's where he was from, grew up with. That's what he was used to. So that's where it first developed. And this gives you an example of the Marconi had a real lock on maritime communication as far as North America is concerned. As you see here, we've got 7 stations actually, Marconi, and 1 Telefunken that we talked about earlier. And these were actually relay stations, is what they were. To give you an example, let's suppose that a ship sending a message to New York, it would send it to Seal Island or Sable Island. These are the ones that are up, the one off the coast, well, they're both off of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. And they in turn would relay the message to Campertown or Cape Race. And those in turn would pass it on to New York or Sag Harbor radio. In other words, that was the system or the circuit that the message took from, say, the Titanic when it's 1,200 miles offshore from New York or Boston, and only 400 miles from St. John's or Sea Island station. In other words, the Titanic transmitter had limited range. Someone's talking. Go ahead.
Put the mute on, Jess.
Okay, I thought somebody had a question or something. That was the system. So we were really talking about relaying messages. Let's talk about ham radio. What's the name of our national organization? American Radio Relay League. It was established probably 2 or 3 years, I don't remember the exact date now, but 2 or 3 years after the Titanic, and again, following on the heels of what the Titanic and what Marconi were doing, in other words, relaying messages back and forth. That's what the American Relay League was created for, to set up a system of relay stations, amateur relay stations, across basically the United States and eventually into Europe and that sort of thing, for the purpose of relaying information, relaying messages, because of the limited, we hadn't really discovered or explored the high short waves and the long distance communication. We were doing a little bit better than SCARC, but not much. And several hundred miles was real DX for these early stations. So that's what the ARRL, why it was created and what it was doing. So, okay, here we are at ground zero. This is the way things looked at the time when the Titanic sank on April 15th. We've got the Titanic in the ice field. Incidentally, the Titanic did receive a subscription iceberg warning from either Seal Island or Sable Island in the Marconi system about icebergs in the area. We see that it's 400 miles from St. John's, and again 1,200 miles from New York. Its sister ship, the Olympic, is 500 miles away. The Olympic did hear the SOS and did contact the Titanic. They were in communication, but it was 500 miles away. It was literally days away. As it turned out, the only ship that heard, let's back up on that. The only ship that responded by radio and actually came to the area was the Carpathia. You see the Carpathia is 58 indicated there in the bottom right. It's a Marconi ship. MPA was its call sign, and it heard and communicated back and forth to the Titanic. There are several Telefunken ships in the area, the Burma and the Frankfurt, and we can only speculate that they heard it, but they did not contact the Titanic because, again, they were prohibited to do so. And the California, which was also nearby. Oh, first of all, let's back up a little bit. The shipboard radio operators generally sent their commercial traffic between the hours of 8 and midnight. They generally shut down their stations at midnight. Again, rolling forward, there was no requirement that they might maintain 24/7 listening watch on the maritime emergency frequency of 500 kilohertz. This was coming later. This would come out as a result of the acts were passed after the Titanic. So the Californian is probably is within sight because it actually saw the rockets that Titanic shot in the air. And it is reported that the Californian thought that they were celebrating midnight, the trip and how well they were doing and how they were moving along, and they just basically ignored it, so that they didn't have any no reason to come back. They had shut down their radio station. They did their radio station on board, and they were silent. The only radio station that was still going was the Carpathia. The Carpathia contacted heard the SOS. We should probably jump ahead or jump sideways here and say that they sent both SOS and CQD, Charlie Quebec Delta, which was the predecessor emergency call of the SOS. It was actually probably developed by Marconi and the Marconi Company and was their standard operating procedure. But the SOS had become known and was in more and more use, and the operators on board the Titanic used both the SOS and the CQD. Okay, here's the parties involved. The captain, Edward Smith. Edward Smith was a lifelong mariner. He was 62 years old, and he planned on retiring from the White Star Lines, the company that owned Titanic, after this ship. He had also commanded the Olympic ship on her maiden voyage, the sister ship, in 1911. Jack Phillips was the main radio man, 25 years of age, and he perished in a lifeboat after the Titanic sunk. Harold McBride was 22 years old. He survived, and as just a matter of interest, he died in England in 1956 at 66 years of age. So relatively speaking, he had a rather long life. We should point out that at about 2 a.m., Captain Smith came into the radio room and discharged both Phillips and Bride, telling them that they had done all they could, told them to go to the lifeboats. Phillips found a collapsible lifeboat that had been launched but had not been assembled. He went into the water and helped them assemble the collapsible light bulb, but as a result of that exposure, some feel, in any case, he perished. Harold Bride made it into one of the last lifeboats that left, and he survived. Here is one of the communications that we saw. You'll notice that they have used both SOS and CQD as the call sign. Again, this was the slide that was received from they used both the CQD and the old SOS, and it was received on the merchant ship Celtic. It's also interesting to note that, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but it lists that it's CQD, which was the emergency call, and the CQ basically stood for the same thing. We know it. Anyone can hear me, please reply. And the D referred to disaster. So I'm calling, it's a disaster. CQD is the reason for that. Here are the parties of the Carpathia, which is remember, this is the boat, the ship that was 56 miles away. Again, the captain, 42 years old. These people all survived. A picture of the Carpathia in the process of finding and taking on the Titanic boats, and Harold Cottam, the radio operator, and he was at the time was 21 years of age. Cottam heard the SOS. This is midnight. The captain's asleep in his cabin. He went to the bridge officer, and again, the bridge officer was an old crusty fellow who did not believe in radio. He said that he didn't have any faith in it. He thought it was that this was static. It was not a valid call. Ignore it. Cottam was troubled by this. Again, see, he's really not an employee. He's not an employee of the ship. He's not a ship officer. He's somewhat independent, although obviously he couldn't go very much against the authority. Anyway, after hearing this CQ for some time, he gets up courage and he wakes the captain. Now, he was smart enough to realize that you really didn't wake the captain from when he's asleep in his stateroom unless it's damned important. And he viewed it that way. Long story short, Arthur Rostam, who was not Sir Arthur at the time, he became Sir Arthur as a result of his activities in rescuing the people, recognized the significance of it, told Cottam to contact the Titanic and tell them that he was on his way. These are actual photographs that were taken from the Carpathia. The Carpathia was really a small ship. It was designed to have 700 passengers. The Titanic had 3,000 passengers, plus probably 4,000 or 5,000 employees and shipmen. The Carpathia has 700 passengers and 45 crew. Pile on top of that the 706 Titanic survivors that it was able to pluck out of the water and save. It was terribly overloaded, but they did the job. Let's take a break here and see if anybody has any questions.
Okay, Frank made a very good comment. Frank suggested that we mute everybody and give them a chance to unmute when we go. So I've muted everybody. So as you want to talk, if you go to the right-hand corner of your picture, you can unmute it or raise your hand and I'll unmute it. So any questions so far? And by the way, Sue, I see your hand raised. Check your chat box because there's been some information in the chat box. Sue, go ahead. I unmuted you.
Okay, this is actually Bob. One of the things that I thought was interesting, just an anecdote to add to it, is I don't know if people can see this.
Oh, yeah.
At Signal Hill, I had the fortunate, a really nice trip that we went all the way up to Lansdowne Meadows, which is the northernmost part of Newfoundland. And we actually went to Signal Hill, which has a wonderful ham radio video that must run 2 hours. And I watched a good portion of that. But you walk up to Signal Hill and it's a very impressive location, and they still have an amateur radio station there. So if you ever get to St. John's, Newfoundland, you want to go to Signal Hill, you walk up there, there's no driving, and you get to see this really neat building that they have there. And that's kind of what it looks like. That's just, but it's a gorgeous location. And so if anybody gets up there, check it out, because there's a lot of historical radio stuff in that building. It's very neat. That's it.
All right. God, I wish I had known about that before. Don, I'll allow Don Moore. You have your hand up. Go ahead. Wait, let me unmute you.
Let me say, Jess or whoever, I'm unable to see the chat function available when I'm running this PowerPoint. I can't get into it. So if anybody's sending me a chat, I'm not going to be able to read it.
Okay, got it. The chats will be there, and I'll save them so we can see them. Don Moore, go ahead. You're unmuted, Don. Go ahead.
I went to a junk shop and I was able to find the actual key that was on the Titanic. You can see a wonderful condition that it's in and how it survived. Just kidding. This is a replica, of course, made in England, and it's a very nice key. It's all brass and wood, and I've not actually used it on the air, but there's really no reason. But you can see the style and sort of the size, and it's a nice instrument, very nice instrument. So my wife got this for me just for fun, maybe 25 years ago. So just wanted to show everybody what the actual key would have looked like.
Cool.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Anybody else? Don, you'll be muted, as well as Sue and Bob. We'll make everybody mute again and go ahead. Bob Cutter, it's back to you.
Okay. Here's again pictures of the actual relay stations that were relaying the information from the Titanic. Sable Island again. Incidentally, Sable Island is quite a DX location because they're other than Canada still has a weather station there, but I'm not even sure if it's still made. It's a big 160 DX location. I've worked them several times, and it draws a lot of followers. It's off the coast of Nova Scotia. And again, Campertown Radio, which is in Halifax itself. These were at least two of the main relay stations that were picking up and exchanging the Titanic. Now, we've got 3,000 passengers on the Titanic. These are people that are very significant. We've all read the stories. We know the names of the people that were on there, Molly Brown, so on and so forth. But the important thing is everybody's getting on the telegrams and sending telegrams to these various ships that are available. They're wanting additional information. They're wanting lists of survivors. They're wanting this, they're wanting that, and everything else. And they're literally overloading the system. When the two radio operators, I should mention at least at this point that the Carpathia only had one radio operator, Cottam. Of course, Harold McBride, as soon as he's rescued, he's the Titanic operator, remember, that survived. As soon as he's rescued, even though his feet are frostbitten, he sits down and starts handling traffic along on the Carpathian radio station. And between the two of them, they pass thousands of messages during this period of time. Here's probably the stations that are getting closer to the New York City. A matter of interest, David Sarnoff. He later became president of RCA. He began his career as a Morse operator at the station in New York, Seagate Radio, located on Coney Island, and Sag Harbor, located on Long Island. These were the main outlet or inlet stations for traffic on the Atlantic, and of course we're working constantly trying to get the information into the hands of the press and everything else concerning this tragedy. Again, somewhat like we're experiencing now, maybe rather than seconds for the information to get out and be distributed, we were talking minutes here, or at the worst an hour. It was unheard of at this period of time to find out about this quickly, about this sort of a tragedy that had occurred. And you can imagine the speculation and the rumor and everything else that came out as a result of it. One of the many things were all these telegrams that were sent wanting additional information from the companies and everything else. In this case, they directed the telegram to the captain of the Carpathia, thinking, okay, this will get through the guardians, if you will, through the radio operators, and we'll get a response to this. The captain of the Carpathia had enough common sense to realize that they couldn't take up time with this. They had to do the health and welfare information. We could answer these questions later at our leisure. We also have telegrams offering the radio operators, in this case, $200 for the exclusive story. Today's dollars, probably $5,000 or $6,000 that they offered the operator to send him a message. Jack Benz fortunately the operators did not take the offer, and again they were compensated and glorified and everything else by Marconi for not taking this temptation. Again, another from another telegram seeking information from this. These are all, an idea, gets to give you an idea of what's going on. As you can see, the telegraphers used a form of cursive, which was really pretty legible when you consider how fast they were going and everything else, and how many hours they'd been at the key and everything else. No typewriters, no nothing else involved. Everything was transcribed by hand, and they may have been making flimsy copies. I'm not sure about that, because a flimsy was a form of a carbon copy that was popularized by the railroad and landline telegraphs, and I'm not sure that it was available for the ships or not. I'm sure it was available for the land stations, because they kept copies of what communication they could, and the logs and everything else. Okay, let's just look at the moral, the purpose, what we're talking about here. Without wireless communication, there was no way to summons help. There probably would have been no survivors, because there's various experts, but the best information is that you were good for at most 10 or 15 minutes in the water at that temperature and surviving, in spite of Leonardo DiCaprio hanging on to the edge of the lifeboat for hours on end, pledging his love and everything else. It just didn't happen that way. An interesting thing, apparently the cause of death was more of a constriction of the chest muscles than actual drowning. In other words, water getting to lungs, it was more a constriction where the lungs could not function. And again, this is just a kind of a NCIS side note, and I think it's pretty well accepted now that because they did perform autopsies in Halifax on some of the cadavers they brought back. Bottom line, the Titanic could very well have been another mysterious ship that wouldn't have been discovered until the Woods Hole folks got up there and actually found it again, and we wouldn't have known what happened. And again, the point being is the value, the importance of point-to-point communications. Every time you relay something, like we're doing here through the internet and everything else, a glitch. I've got a glitch here this morning. I can't get my video to work. There's no reason why the whole system didn't get down, and we're not doing this. And again, the point that Paul made, and I make too, is that we still have this need, even in this day and age, direct communications without relay, without repeater, without the internet and everything else, has a place in our overall scheme and our overall thoughts of communication. After the Titanic, radio all of a sudden came to the forefront. It was the subject of popular magazines. The Radio Act it passed that first of all started licensing, and the most important factor was part of that Radio Act that the Congress passed was the authorization for anyone to receive transmissions from anyone else. In other words, you could eavesdrop. Hams also became licensed, and this put them on somewhat of an equal footing with the shore stations, the Marconi stations, and the result being that there was some recognition of it, because we did have many, many reports of hams receiving these distress communications, not from the Marconi relay stations, but directly from the Titanic and the others. And they attempted to feed this information into the system, but it was refused because, again, they were not acknowledged as having any right. Both Marconi and Telefunken took the position that you can't copy our information, you can't talk back and forth, we own it. Congress said, no, you don't own it once you throw it into the ether or the airwaves. There it's common domain, it's public property, anyone can, with the proper knowledge and equipment, can receive it as long as they do not use it for profit and they do not use it maliciously. These were the two, and these are still our criteria that we have to live on. Maliciously, you know, boy, we're stretching that almost to the breaking point. But profit-wise, I think we still follow pretty carefully.
Except for cell phones.
Yeah, well, again, but cell phones are not, you know, they're part of the relay system. These are the more recent, and some of you shortwave listeners or others that have spent some time, these are the coastal stations that, if you're kind of a CW net, Point Reyes, KFS, and KPH are still operated as part of the National Park System. If you ever get out north of San Francisco, visit Point Reyes. They've rehabilitated the stations. It's still on several nights a year where they fire those old things up, and you have the beauty, and they send by the semi-automatic key and everything else. And again, the WCC out of Massachusetts and KMI and San Francisco. These were commercial stations. Down at the bottom is an example of what the CQ message was that these stations would send out. QSX, meaning I have information for you, I have messages for you. Here comes the traffic list of the stations, the ships that I have information for, and then on the even hours, GMT, I'm going to transmit the Pacific weather. That's probably what San Francisco and Point Reyes is sending. I doubt seriously if Chatham was sending that sort of information. Anyway, just a bit of semi-nostalgia for a few of us that have been around long enough to actually hear these stations on the air. Here's the rescue ship, the Carpathia. Here's Bride being helped down the gangplank. He was the operator from the Titanic who ended up with the frostbitten feet but survived. The Carpathia coming into New York with the Titanic survivors. Just some statistics: 337 bodies recovered, 128. This was a cable ship that actually did this. In other words, a ship out of Halifax that was designed and constructed for the purpose of repairing and restoring undersea cables. Remember, we had undersea telegraph cables before we had RF and before Marconi, and before that was the system of communication between North America and Europe. Anyway, they dispatched a cable ship from Halifax, and it was able to get on the scene in approximately, well, let me see if I've got about here. I don't have the exact time that they have, but they were there the next day in any case. They were the ones that recovered these. Again, they noted we I guess had enough life jackets. We don't have any indication. Most of the bodies were wearing life jackets. 337 recovered. The rescue ship determined that 128 corpses were so damaged, so incomplete, if you will, that they buried these at sea. 159 were returned to, corpses were returned to Halifax, and 150 were interred in Halifax. Here is the Titanic's graves in Halifax, and the one grave they had was an identified 3-year-old child. They've later extracted DNA from that child, and they actually found the relatives in England that were related, and they elected to have the child's body remain where it was, and so they added a brass plaque bringing this thing up to date. Again, a kind of a what, if you will, a Monday morning quarterbacking of what happened. We've gone over most of those things. It was a situation where commerce and competition got out of hand. Congress and the various legislative bodies of around the world saw the problem with this, passed regulations that got the system opened up so that there was none of this people being prohibited from contacting each other, and the information got into the system as soon as possible. And again, this is again kind of a synopsis of the Radio Act of 1912, which was passed directly as a result of the Titanic. We've adopted most of those things already, but here they are, kind of a summary. The last one is interesting. Those red rocket flares are not supposed to be used to celebrate New Year's. And you remember the California said that's what they were doing, and we could ignore that. 24/7 monitoring the emergency frequency, direct communication between the Radio Shack and the bridge. Passenger ships will maintain contact with the shore station, and these Q signals, and a backup power source for the they were not dependent, in other words, on the ship's engine to provide power. Again, more of the requirements. Those of you who've been on cruise ships, you know, the compulsory lifeboat drill. Go to your lifeboat station before the ship leaves the port and everything else, and the equipment to be on board. Again, safety precautions. Again, we started. These are the changes that we started getting more information out to the boats, broadcast more freely, and again, we had more coverage of the ice patrol, and again, a lot of that we're doing by satellite now, of course, and various means of getting the weather and the conditions out to the traffic primarily in the North Atlantic, but also in the Pacific now, because we have, you know, it's very significant storms there. Can it happen again? Well, we all remember this. This was an example of who knows. The skipper was enjoying the dinner, the cocktail hour. Who knows what happened? But anyway, and there were cell phone coverage, and the information did get out. But the point is that we could still have disasters, even in this day and age. And with the ships getting larger and larger, some of you who have, I'm sure Pat and Richard have seen them coming into Florida. I mean, it's just like the Empire State Building laying down is what it looks like. It's just incredible. They look like they're so top heavy that they can't stay afloat. Just a view of the people that the 1,300 people that died as a result of the Titanic. You know, we kind of forget the individuals that were involved. Some of them were famous, some of them were not. And in that regard, probably the movie Titanic brings that to a forefront, because steerage way, the very poor passengers in the very bowels of the Titanic, not very many of them made it, I don't think. But again, those are people that were involved also. And by way of, I mentioned at the beginning that Paul worked for the Very Large Array. He actually designed, constructed, engineered very low noise, very low temperature receivers, cryogenically cooled, as he indicated. And they were primarily, or his receivers were primarily monitoring the sun. And just as a reason aside, and just what I came up on, if you go to the ARRL website and look for their eclectic technology blog, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, they cover a system where you can monitor the sun's noise on about 20 megahertz and just a little bit of ways from WWV and program it and buy software and show where this information and the bursts that are coming out of the sun, which the very large, of course, you're not going to get the same results as the very large array, but you will show sun or the RF energy being generated by the sun and getting to us. I think that's it. Jess?
Wow, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the clap and say, beautiful presentation, wonderful, very informative. Bob, we can't thank you enough for doing this. I learned a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions. So let's raise our hands. And first of all, everybody give Bob Cutter a round of applause for an outstanding presentation. Hear, hear. I'm going to unmute everybody so we can give Bob Cutter. Let's go around. Any comments, thoughts? Anybody? Everybody's unmuted. So Ted, go ahead. I see your hand up first.
Hi. My question is regarding if you have any information on this, the statistics. Did most of the people in the Titanic succumb to hypothermia? I'm a diver, and I can tell you, I've dived recently in Grand Junction in 37 degree water, and I was fully insulated. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be in the North Atlantic without any protection. I think you'd last maybe less than a minute. What's your knowledge of that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, the autopsies that they performed in Halifax of the cadavers that were brought in showed that they almost universally died as a result of constriction of the chest muscles rather than actually drawing. So I would think that would come under the category of hypothermia. In other words, the extreme cold temperature causes basically the chest to crush or to collapse enough that the lungs cannot fill. And so rather than the water being in the lung, which we would call drowning, the lungs were unable to expand. And the information they come up with is max 10 minutes, 12 minutes exposure in this water.
Unbelievable. Horrible. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Bob,
Richard, go ahead. I see you.
Bob, when I used to go in these radio rooms on the various ferries and things, when they had ships' radio officers, there was always a clock in the radio room with a red segment on it. And my understanding, and you could probably tell me more about this, was that this was where they kept radio silence and listened. Do you know
That's
about
correct.
that?
That's correct. They were to maintain radio silence during that time for the express purpose of receiving distress or any other information.
Yeah, I thought that was the case.
How long a period of time was that?
An hour. 1 hour.
Okay. Bob and Sue, I see you.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Yeah, I guess I am. Just a couple of comments. Historically, the American Radio Relay League was founded in 1914, so that's less than 2 years after this incident. And it's also interesting, here's the first copy, the first issue of the American Radio League handbook. It's called A Manual of Amateur Shortwave Radio Telegraph Communications. And you can see that on the book there. There we go. Anyway, that's a copy of the 1926 book, not too thick. And the other thing was today, if anybody's interested, I know most of you probably know this, some of you won't, 14.3 megahertz, 14,300 if you care, is the maritime net. And the Maritime Net today keeps track of all small vessels. A lot of it's in the Pacific. I've heard some in the Atlantic, but mainly the Pacific. They keep track of every vessel through amateur radio communications. So those people do a short weather report, their lawn and sea conditions. So if any of you want to hear any of that, you can tune on 14.300. In the evenings, it's the best because propagation is, you know, into the Pacific Ocean at that point. And then I had one question for Bob, and I've forgotten the answer to it. I knew it at one point, but today, most ships, I don't know what the regulations are, but most ships today carry a transponder that is satellite monitored, and you can download an app. And that's what I want to ask Bob. What's the information on that? You can download an app and see where every ship at sea is. Do you know that, Bob?
Might be in the powder room.
I don't know. I think Bob dropped out? I don't see him here. I saw him. He stopped the sharing, so he might come back. Does anybody see Bob Cutter?
I do. I see Sue and Bob.
No, Bob Cutter.
Bob.
Oh, no.
Does anybody else know the name of that app?
I don't know the name of it, but I know APRS.FI supports the internet connection for that. So that does actually exist. It's just, I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but
Okay.
it's integrated into the APRS.FI web app.
System, yeah.
Okay, Don Moore, I saw your hand up.
Right. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Regarding that net, 14300, one time a few years ago, I was out portable QRP and just listening around, and I was tuned to that net, and I heard some actual emergency traffic. It was quite chilling. And they talked to a lot of cruising sailboats all over the place. And there was I think it was a Delta Airlines flight flying high overhead. It was on its way into LA, but it was still up. It was actually, I think, over Colorado, and he started relaying. You know, they all have HF ACARS transceivers on board. So he was a ham, and he took over, and so he was like a mobile command post. I listened to that until it was all over. It was really something. I don't know if there was a tragedy averted, but a lot of times you listen and people are just checking in and stuff, but it was really something to hear actual emergency traffic. And number two, a few years ago, I did, I think when I got my key, that that I started looking up on the internet, and you can find very easily the actual transcription of all the communications that started out, and the Carpathia making contact, and what they said is, and then somebody's done it with the Morse code in the background, and it's very, very well done. I can't give you a link, I don't know it, but it's something to chase down, and that is chilling too. So those are my two comments.
Bob Cutter, good to see you back in. There was a question while you were going in and out. So first of all, good to see you back in. Bob and Sue, you were talking about a question when Bob Cutter was out, so go ahead.
Yeah,
Bob and Sue?
I'm unmuted. I was wondering what the name of that app is, and I think I saw it on your iPhone that allows you to look at, use APRS and look at all the ships at sea.
Yeah, I think it's called marinetraffic.com.
Okay, Bob and Sue?
That's it. I'll write that down. Thanks.
Okay.
Let me, before we went off the air, let me just allow me one more proud grandpa comment. It said green board in the service. That means that you're clear to die, but more importantly, I have a grandson who just is just being commissioned an ensign in the submarine service.
Hey, you got to be happy about that. Wow. Again, Bob, we thank you for an outstanding presentation. Anything else for Bob Cutter? Thank you, sir. Clark will return it to you, and you can carry on from there.
All right. Hey, I got to admit, Bob, you did a fantastic job. Absolutely blew me away. It's so great that we could do this, and when we're not able to get together as a group. So that was fantastic. Do we have any other comments from anyone else?
No, you can never put away. I'll eat the old oatmeal that's in the refrigerator already. I might take that out and put it on the bowl, and then use that same bowl for the new oatmeal if you wish. It's up to you.
Okay, Jerry, we know you're unmuted.
Does anybody have any show and tell?
Say it again.
Does anyone have any show and tell?
Show my wife.
Okay, you're going to go to Bob Ludke. He's going to have a presentation also.
Yeah, if you want to do the show and tell first, you can do that, and then I'll kind of conclude with that DXpedition video that's about 5 or 10 minutes long.
Real quick, Eric put some comments down in the chat. Eric, you want to comment real quick about your chat?
Yeah.
You have to unmute.
Yes, I know. Yeah, that's just a link to that marinetraffic.com webpage. I do have an unrelated question entirely. What's everybody doing for field day this year? I planned on renting a trailer, since we're not going to do the site up on, I'm assuming we're not going to do the site up at the usual spot, wherever it is, Missouri Heights. Looking for other locations or some suggestions to where I might want to set up. So looking for ideas on that. Don't really have to discuss it now, but just something to think about.
I have a comment on that. Eric, have you read the notification from the ARRL?
You can tell. There's Africa, Spain.
Can we kind of mute everybody?
All this is.
Go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Yeah, it looked like everybody was checking at the website, but go ahead, Bob. You kind of started to say something there.
Yeah, I think people should read the ARRL had announcement about field day in general and what to expect. And it sounds to me like getting together in a group is one thing they advise not to do for sure. Okay.
Right. I kind of figured that much, but as I'm kind of looking for spots, or if is anybody.
We used
I'm just
to
kind
go.
of looking at it like what's going to be open or available. Like if I could go up on the Grand Mesa or someplace, that's an idea. If that's going to be an option, I don't know. Just wondering if anybody knew anything or heard anything about public lands opening up or anything like that.
I haven't heard that. We've in the past gone, I don't know if you were with us, Eric, we went up to the flat tops and also way up 4 Mile. That's really, those are really isolated areas where very few people go. Obviously really good sites for ham radio.
I wonder if they'll be many people on them.
My take on it is if there were a real emergency, probably you'd stay at home and stay by your radios. So whether I'm here or back at Elk Springs, don't know, but I'm going to operate, single operator, either 1D or 1E from home, and figure that it's good practice.
That's a good point too. Unfortunately, my location isn't really all that wonderful for HF.
Can you go up above Battlement Mesa, Eric? We hike up there sometimes, and there's some pretty good spots up above
Towards
Battlement
Man
Mesa.
Peak.
Yeah, probably without the, I could probably just drive up in the Jeep, but I don't know about taking a trailer up the road. Bad enough trying to get a bicycle up the road.
Okay.
A few years back, can I interrupt a second here?
Go ahead, Bob.
A few years ago, Fred and I were going up on the east end of the flat tops there outside of Dot Zero, and we operated separately. We were probably 1,000 yards apart or 500
Not
yards
even.
apart, and that's a possibility. If you had a small group or 2 or 3 people, you could spread apart enough to still operate and have a lot of fun. I think we were both doing QRP. Fred might have been doing full power, but you might give your impression, Fred. I was hoping on doing it again this year because I got a little camper, so I'd like to try to get out if we can do something like that where we're spread apart. Otherwise, I agree with Pat, just staying around the home.
Another good place is up on the Buford Road, up onto the flat tops. It's only 10 miles up. It's completely drivable. You don't need a 4-wheel drive. And I go up there and operate portable, and there's some big open areas there. So that's another possibility.
Yeah, we've done that one in the past.
I just had the thought here. I got some email from ARRL that mentioned some of the latest news, and they were talking about the ability to use N1MM in a distributed sort of fashion. If you had internet access, that you could have a connected group through a network where you all share the same database, and you could all participate in field day activities, but you could be at home doing it.
Yeah, we've kind of done a little bit of that. Once or twice we've tried that at the field day site. Definitely something that we could re-examine, take a look at it again. Unfortunately, I don't run N1MM myself, but could probably set something up with an extra PC.
Clark, would this be a topic that comes up at maybe a next meeting in person or via Zoom that we would talk about field day?
I have to do that, Jess. I mean, we can't pull off a field day without some sort of a meeting. So, yeah, I think that's appropriate. I don't know that we need to have it be a club meeting, because we're talking about substituting, I guess, Pat's fox hunt for a meeting where we're just doing the planning on field day. But I'm thinking we'll do it one Tuesday or Thursday, or Tuesday or Thursday meeting. Zoom would be a good way to start off, keep it going. Like we have a field day committee that's just making plans and we need a N1MM, a copy of, and we're going to operate that way. We just need a plan. So I'm wondering if somebody wants to volunteer to coordinate field day this year.
Okay, it sounds like you're going to have to get back with everybody.
I think we're probably a month away from making any real decisions, just based on what's happening. Things may open up a little more. They may close down a little more. It's going to be hard to. It'd be nice to have the software available, though, to do that. Eric, you did that for us once. Would you be willing to handle maybe the software hardware?
Yeah, I could probably reread some of that stuff and try to figure out what to do. I know there's like a hosts file that you have to have that would have everybody's address in it and everything, and probably have to get some people going through some of the dynamic DNS stuff and get that set up. But it's doable. It's not, I wouldn't say it's impossible.
Okay.
so that, maybe we could get together, and set up a config file or something that everybody could use, fairly easy. But yeah, it's the main thing I'm thinking of is, do I need to cancel my my rental or not, and go from there, because I imagine, they'd probably be okay with it, but if I do it like a week before, it's like, well, they probably won't be too happy about that. But if it's a month or two, I think they'd probably be okay with refunding my deposit and that sort of thing. Anyway, that's all I got.
Let's see. Clark, go ahead. I'm following your lead. Go ahead.
Oh, my lead. Okay. Well, I think we're going to get together. We got to have somebody that's coordinating, and I'm certainly willing to.
Can't hear you,
that, but I can hear you, Richard. Whatever you're trying to say. But I do have a problem. I've got a conflict with. I hardly even want to mention it. The NRA banquet was rescheduled to field day on Saturday night. So I've got a potential conflict. And like everybody else, I've been figuring, well, we'll see, because I had a feeling we're not getting together at all. So I don't even know if I have a conflict. I think Bob's comment about being a month out before we know what we're doing is a salient point. But on the other hand, we ought to be talking about discussions on what we can do if we're going to do something different. If it requires software and a totally different plan. And I think it'd be kind of neat, you have perhaps the option of either doing a remote site yourself or just stay at home. Either way. And in my case, if I'm going to be double booked on it, I might want to just stay at home and then take the Saturday evening off. I don't know. That's where I'm coming from.
What was that about? Whether to do field day or not? I think it's a matter of
Bill, you want to say something? Why don't you just get in front of the camera and share it with us all?
Okay, Clark. The question I have, this is either for Jess or Eric, but on my participant list, where it lists everybody's name there, there's these little boxes next to it with different colors and different letters in them. Does anybody know what that's about, or can explain it to me?
I think that's just your initials. Like, you can probably go in and put a still picture of yourself in there if you wanted to.
All right.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Thanks for that info.
Well, that was illuminating.
Eric, you okay about any other questions about field day, or do you
No,
want
I'm just
to?
kind of putting it out there. I'm sure we'll have more to come. I'm certain on that, or pretty sure on that.
Okay. Ted, did you key up to say something? Okay. I have a topic that I would like to bring up real quick before Bob Ludke gets into his. We've been kicking around an idea about this Zoom, and we've been using an account that was available, but I would propose that we have a club Zoom account, and we could have it where anybody could use the club Zoom account anytime they wanted to. You would just reserve it, and the club would have a Zoom account that we could use, and it wouldn't be any individuals. It would belong to the club. Any thoughts on that?
Sounds like a very good idea, Jess.
Okay.
It would be an account that you could use for your own private use, let's say, not necessarily for club use. Is that right?
Well, I think there's some limitations on how you set that up with Zoom, because companies, for example, that have multiple administrators, you've got to pay money for each person that's using it.
Well, there's another option that you could designate users and have it as an organization. And I would be willing to start off being the trustee of the club account and experiment with it and make it available to everybody in the club.
There's some things that
I think it's a good idea. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let me suggest if Jess wants to research it and set it up, then Jess, give me a phone call and I'll give you the club's debit card numbers.
Okay. Do I have the go ahead to do that and then get back to the club and report?
Yeah, I think let's do it.
Okay, so be it. Kevin, I'll do the research and then get back to you and get back to everybody. Clark, back to you. Go ahead.
I'm just going to pass it to Bob and let him do his presentation. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I hear you. Okay, I'll start it up. But basically, this was from HamNation. I wrote down the number of it. I think it's trying to think of the thing. Let's see, it's number 446. If you care to look it up, just go to Twit TV and you can look at the whole thing. So what this is, the guys just came back from South Orkney Island. Think the Antarctic. Think people are paying money for a QSL card. In addition to all the money they accumulate and the grants they get, it still costs them between $20,000 and $30,000 each to go there and do this for ham radio. So that's a little on the background. Valerie, NV9L, interviewed a couple of the guys just as they got back from the DXpedition here. So again, it was VP8 Papa Juliet. And it's about 10 minutes long, I think. It's kind of neat. It's self-describing. They got some nice pictures and things. It's not a professional video that they put together yet because they just got here. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys and then start it up, and I'll stop at the end. Share.
Bob and Sue, you got it? Bob and Sue?
Yeah, go ahead. Let me see if I can. Are you hearing me still?
Yeah, I am. Let me unmute everybody just in case they have.
There you go.
Okay, everybody's unmuted. Go ahead with any questions, comments, etc.
Well, I got a little show and tell. My daughter bought this for me. You can see that. It's like a Christmas present sort of thing. It's a UK magazine, Practical Wireless, of May 1965. It cost 2 shillings at the time, which is what, like 20 cents. And free inside is a blueprint to build this 3-wave band 7-transistor receiver. They've got a blueprint inside. But interesting to see all the advertisements on the outside, still in pounds, shillings, and pence.
Richard, what year was that?
1965. Yeah,
okay.
good. Yeah.
That's the year I got my ticket for the first time.
Really? You must have been very
February
young.
65.
Ah. The other thing I was going to show, if you're interested, was I made this this PA, the power amplifier, which is like that, and this goes together, and it goes with the QRP Labs transceivers, which I've made 2 of, a 40 meter and a 20 meter. And I've got them in the little German boxes that the German guy makes the encapsulation. These are fabulous little CW transceivers.
I have them.
I got a bit fed up of doing jigsaw puzzles, and this is a more interesting sort of jigsaw puzzle. putting these things together. And Ken, I see you there. Have you put yours together yet?
Yeah, I'm just getting around to it here any day.
Okay. Well, I've done two. When I say I'm stuck here, I thought, well, you know, I've done the damn jigsaw puzzles. I'm fed up with that. Besides, I don't know whether you know, but there's a world shortage of jigsaw puzzles at the moment.
That's crazy. On a different sort of show and tell, I was talking to Bob Ludke earlier in the week about All Star, and he referred me to Dan K1DSC. I was looking for a way to get into All Star without having to build the whole darn unit myself, the node. And Dan directed me to a website that I'm going to suggest you look at if you're interested in getting into All Star and aren't there already. But if you go to node-ventures.com, node-ventures.com, there's a guy in San Francisco that's selling a combination of a transceiver and a Raspberry Pi computer, pretty much plug and play. And on the newbie section next week, maybe we can get Dan on to discuss it. Sells it for $280. I don't understand how he can possibly make any money at that. But I wanted a way to be able to check into the Ski Country Amateur Radio Club net, as well as the local nets here, which I can't hit with a handheld from our house. So take a look at nodeventures.com if you are interested in All Star. Back over to you guys.
Hey, could Pat please put that on the chat mode so people can copy it down?
Good suggestion. I'll do that. Okay, how do I make chat work though? Oh.
Well, it seems Pat's going to be kind of quiet here for a little while, and I haven't said anything. Do you hear me okay there, Sue and Pat? And okay, you're right next to me. I still haven't figured out how this thing works as to which pictures you're seeing and why they keep they often change positions without telling anybody. But anyway, and also W6CKC may know this, but the you know, I try to keep my mic muted because sometimes I forget, and I try to talk to Trish here, and I find myself talking to everybody else, and I don't want to interrupt somebody else. So I don't know why that keeps happening, that it says the host is telling you to unmute your mic or something like that. There's a window that pops up in the middle of this thing. So I've got a lot to learn on this silly thing. When you started talking about field day here, I was not here because I had to go make a bathroom break. And so I'm curious, field day is 10 weeks from today. Okay, if you look on the calendar. And I may be an optimist, I am an optimist, and I may be wrong, but I have a feeling that over much of the country, field day is going to be after this coronavirus thing, and it's going to be pretty well disappeared. So considering the field day is supposed to be preparing you for emergency operation, and you can't predict an emergency, I'm curious as to why, and this is probably a question for Bob Ludke here more than anybody else, why do we have to try to cancel field day way back when I think the ARRL did it, and you know, when it's really supposed to be preparing for an emergency operation? And I have you know, when I prepare for field day, I start maybe a few days ahead of time, get my generator and all that checked out and make sure everything runs and all my camping gear and the camper and all that stuff. And I'm ready to go. So I don't understand why we're canceling field day or trying to make it an on the internet operation with everybody separated this far in advance. Go ahead, Bob, give me an answer.
Jerry, Bob, before you go, 1 minute. Eric, would you let everybody know that you're recording again? You turned it off and then turn it on. So Bob, if you hold on, let Eric comment and then come back to you. Eric?
Yeah, I just didn't want to record during the HamNation video, just you know, just in case there's a you know, copyright violation or something like that comes up. You know, it's better just to not record other people's stuff if we don't have to. So that's all. But yeah, I'm recording again, so we're back.
Okay, Bob, Lucky, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, to Jerry's point, I will gladly give him permission to run field day. I start about a month ahead and I talk to 30 people and see what everybody's bringing. So Jerry can do it. That's why you plan ahead. It's not something you pick up 2 days before and do. It doesn't happen if you're the organizer. If you're just bringing a generator, I can just bring my generator and radio and let somebody else do it. I mean, that's the difference. You want to do it, Jerry?
Well, I don't know really how to do it, okay?
Well,
like
that's
you do.
you
So
got to learn how to do that. You got to do it. It takes a lot of time. That's why people plan. And ours is, I would say ours is pretty easy. Where Chris and Heather operate out there in California, they have over 150 people.
well, okay.
I think that's the answer. Okay, it's just, it's who you are and what you do. And I know you bring a lot of stuff always. We always can count on you for the generators and helping antennas, and the 30 people that come all, you know, do a good part of it. But I think that's the reason, because, you know, there's big groups and then there's small groups. If you go out by yourself, it's not much of a challenge. But the numbers of people that operate and attend these events, it's just wonderful to know that, you know, you say we're going to do field day and everybody shows up and everybody through the years knows what they're bringing and stuff. But, you know, there's a level of organization that is above that. And, you know, that's it. I love to do it.
Well, that's great, and we're thankful that you do there. But what I'm saying is, why don't we wait until maybe 3 or 4 weeks before this happens, and I'll bet we could get it all done, especially if you could farm out some of the operation to other people. And I wouldn't mind doing part of it if you would tell me what to do. And let's see what happens, because I say I have a feeling that especially like here on the Western Slope and for most of the country, I'll bet things are pretty well back to normal. That's just an optimist. I may be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that at all. But I mean, that's, you know, generally the issue. And I don't, the things that I can see that we probably should look into is, like Eric kind of agreed to look into N1MM if we're going to do something that's not like everything we've done before. It'd be nice to understand that software, and I know that's going to take some significant planning. I'm sure Eric, when he set up that node, when we just hooked up, what, 5 stations together maybe at one time, and we had all the logs coordinated, that was really neat. But that takes hardware and software. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, you know, that part of it is just one section of it too, because then there's you know, there's you know, they call it no IP or dynamic DNS type stuff that would have to set up, that people would have to get into their routers maybe and set that up. So it gets a little trickier. Might be some options where we can set up a VPN connection for the group might make it a lot easier. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, just didn't know about this an hour ago. So, but yeah, let me look into it and we'll see what we can do. I'm sure there's plenty of options out there, and be willing to set up some calls with some folks who might be willing to, who might have some knowledge about this stuff and be willing to help out with that too. And of course, we do have the 3 gigahertz network locally. If you can see Sunlight and Anvil Points and some of the other sites, you can connect to it with a 3 gigahertz radio. I have several, and we could probably look around for some other options that way too. So just thinking of spitballing things off the top of my head.
I
I kind of want to make a comment if I can have the microphone here. And it's addressed to what Jerry's comment is. The whole purpose of this social distancing is to avoid spreading the disease anymore. So amongst our community, how many of us believe that we're going to actually have somebody that comes to field day that's going to have it? I don't know. And I don't know how it's going to be in June. But the whole idea of social distancing is to avoid that. And I guess the other part about it is Jerry seems to think that we'd be in phase 2, I think, where large groups would be acceptable by June. And maybe that's true. I don't know. But there's one thing that I personally feel is I don't want that disease. I 75, breathing problems really don't appeal to me at all. And the flu and death is just really not something I'm scheduled to do this year, at least in my mind. So I'm thinking that what Eric's doing and looking at options and a way to spread out is probably a good idea to just explore ways that we can do it and do it safely and meet all these social distancing incentives.
I would second what Clark's saying. I don't want to be in a tent with people that have been here, there, and everywhere. And I'll be at home, either here or Elk Springs doing field day. Just no way. If it's possible to link N1MM, I'm not sure I'm smart enough to do it, but power to you. But no tents in the wilderness for this old boy. I'm going to back out because we've got company coming. But Sue, Ludke, could you tell me how to post this chat thing? I've got it typed, but it doesn't seem to be going out.
What are you trying to do? You trying to do the type in stuff?
Yeah, just the address for this Node Ventures that I was mentioning. Sue asked me to.
You have to press enter. You have to press enter, Pat.
Pat, you have to unmute. We can't hear you.
I say I pressed enter and nothing happened.
Did you type your message in already? I'm not hearing you.
Okay, there it is. We just saw it.
Okay.
So
where
are those messages kept now if I want to go and have a look at them?
Richard, okay, let me go back to Pat. Pat, you have to unmute. You're muted. Okay. Pat, we'll come back after you unmute. Richard, I'm not sure on the iPad. Are you on the iPad or the computer?
I'm on the iPad.
Okay, I'm not. You might have to get with Sue Lunte to see where those are, because I'm not sure on iPad, or maybe Steve knows if he's still in.
Yeah. On this subject of field day, it just occurs to me it's such a big event every year for, you know, the American amateur radio fraternity, that I'll be amazed if they don't come up with some brilliant ideas on how it can be done in a safe manner to avoid exactly what Pat was saying. Because even if we do get to phase 1 or 2 or whatever, I think we're going to be in a situation where a lot of people, myself included, and we quite a few of us, I think, are a little bit over 55 or whatever. We're not going to want to catch this damn thing, which is going to be around for a while. So let's keep our ear to the ground, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of very, very good ideas coming up from these very imaginative ham radio people across the country. So I'm sure we'll come up with something that will be fun, just as like we've done today. I mean, let's face it, it was, you know, Bob Cutter's presentation was brilliant. And, you know, we've had these other meetings, and I'm stuck on my own in this little house in Florida, and a lot of other people like that. So I don't think if it goes on that into June, it won't be, people will want to do something, something for field day one way or another. But obviously, I think the basic thing is let's all keep safe.
Okay.
I second what you say there, Richard.
Okay.
Jerry, I wanted to go back what you were saying about the different views of and things that you see. On Monday nights, we try to hold a newbie session, and these are kind of the mechanics that we go through on Monday at 7 o'clock for people who want to test equipment or just talk and kind of see how it works. So maybe Monday night for any newbies slash technical work that people want to check out their equipment, we can answer those kind of questions. And the other thing I would propose is we've been having a Thursday evening session. I'm not sure where it came from, but I think with the Monday newbie session, Tuesday breakfast morning, I think we have enough going. So I would propose kind of getting rid of the Thursday evening. I don't know. I'd leave it up, and whoever wants to get in on Thursday will get in. But I think the official for the club would be the Monday newbie session and the Tuesday breakfast, if that's okay. Jerry, did that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, that's fine with me. I'll try to see you on Monday, I guess.
Okay.
How are you coming with your antenna?
Oh, God, don't even ask. I'll tell you about that. It's coming. I got the pass-through board painted so it matches the window, and one step at a time, but it's coming.
You're like me. Too many other things in the way.
There you go. Sue, you had your hand up on your iPad, or are you just testing?
I'm looking for that chat button.
Oh, okay. Clark, where do we go from here?
I just wanted to let Ken and Betty know. I tried to get that 720p camera, and I went to the site that they suggested, and they were sold out. And I went to another place. I went on Amazon as well, and anything in the $20 range for that camera microphone setup was not available, sold out, or whatever. However, there were ones that were 4 times more expensive, same model. So I declined to buy. Yeah, but if they have a source they could suggest where I can actually buy one and expect it in a few days. Other than that, I think they go on to Monday night, Tuesday morning is probably better. The group's getting kind of, well, it seemed smaller, let's say, on Thursday night, and 4 times a week for us to get together, if you can consider the net, I think is a bit more than necessary.
On that subject, Clark, isn't Jess or somebody looking at having a ski country amateur radio club Zoom site, or whatever you might call it, for us to use whenever we feel like it? Aren't we going to come up with some proposals and talk to Kevin about it.
Yeah.
So let's see where that goes.
Okay.
Sue?
Yeah, if you're looking for chat on the iPad, if you go up to the top of your screen and touch up there, there are 3 little dots that say more.
Right.
If you touch those 3 little dots, you'll have access to chat.
Chat 8. Okay. Super. Thank you very much, Sue. That's so easy. That's good of you.
On the subject of Zoom, not everybody might be aware, but anybody can have a free account. And it lets you have up to 100 participants. The only limitation is that your meetings can only go up to 40 minutes. So, but you know, that works fine for quick little family gatherings or something like that. Obviously not appropriate for things like what we're doing right at the moment, but that's a simple way to, you know, involve some people in Zoom without going through a lot of iterations with a club passwords and so forth.
Frank, to follow up with what you're saying, that's absolutely right. And it's quick and fast to put a Zoom session out there. But Pat, to go back to what you were saying about All-Star, one of the features that I've been able to use All-Star with, especially going back to a couple of guys in Southern California that we work with, we were able to put up an X-Flector and work on some All-Star and DMR accounts and share our screen and share photos. So that might be something that the club would want to put on, and you could use it for technical things. So that's a possibility also. But Frank, you're absolutely right that free Zoom account is quick and dirty to start some things.
And yes, we could talk in more detail. I got to get out of here, but we can talk in more detail later about All-Star and the various devices. Thanks to everybody. I've got to move on. Have a great rest of the week then. Thank you.
Okay, Pat, take care.
Hey, Clark?
Yeah.
I have a suggestion. We don't have, you know, we had a meeting planned up at Pat's place actually for our fox hunt. So I was going to suggest that maybe a month from now we just have a meeting, and I'll see if I don't have anybody in mind right now. If anybody here has a suggestion or a topic they'd like to cover, just like Bob did, it'd be very nice to do that. But to have a May meeting, a May 16th meeting, you know, so kind of plan for that if we can do it. If I can
Well, I think that'd be a great idea, and maybe we can also have like an update on possibilities for field day as well, so we can further that discussion. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Right. All right. You know, just looking at my watch, it's 12:30, and I believe normally we're done before noon, aren't we? A regular meeting.
I would say so.
Yeah.
That's
Anybody,
40 minutes. 40
you know,
minutes wouldn't be long enough.
It's kind of funny, but Annalise and Zach are going to join us. By the way, the baby's not here yet. But I think they're going to stop by White House Pizza for takeout. So that's what we're doing instead of going to Russo's.
I had one question.
All right.
Phil, this is nice to see you. First time you're getting here. Did you have any problems setting up or getting in? Obviously not, but how was it for you?
Okay, Jess, it was pretty good, fairly easy, like I was saying.
Bill.
I hope you guys can hear me. My son set up the camera, and it has a microphone in it, so that seems to be working fine. And my daughter got me to show me how to download the program and put in my call sign, and we typed in the password, which she got a big kick out of. And yeah, here we are, zip, bang, boom, on Zoom.
Outstanding.
All right, guys. Well, it has been a fun meeting. I enjoyed seeing everybody there. I'm still trying to learn how to do some of these things here. You know, we have the thumbs up part that we can put up there on the screen. Applause. All right, if everybody wants to know how to clap, and see, now I don't know how to turn it off. Oh, there you go, Eric. All right, yay. Okay, everybody's chiming in. Sounds good. All right, well, I guess let's see. The only thing I need to show here is this is my homemade mask that my daughter-in-law made for me. It's got straps. It's very easy to wear. Here is an N95 mask that my son brought home from Boulder. So we have one of those available. All right. And I have my auto body dust mask here that I've been using for years and years. So we have plenty of masks around the house here. And I guess if we did field day, we'd all have to mask up, get some testing kits so we know that there's no asymptomatic people out there. And well, I guess we could go from there, but that's the way I see things happening right now. Back to you, Jess.
Hey, Jess, why don't you ask N0KE? How'd you do up there, Phil? N0KE, how'd you do?
Yeah, well, I got great help here getting hooked up because I never would have got this figured out by myself. I wouldn't have the first clue how to get this going.
It's working well.
Well, I've got one of these.
Hey, I like that, Richard. That's great.
Yeah. I didn't get this especially for this occasion. I had this for a long time. For when I'm doing my wood turning, it's got the shavings going up my nose.
All right. Well, I've seen a lot of those in the grocery store. When
really?
Yeah. Everybody in the grocery store is wearing a mask, and yeah, I think it's going to be the new norm here out there, guys.
Yeah. Goodness me, what a business. Yeah, I've got two. The only masks I've got, the ones I bought from Harbor Freight.
Yeah, those were something that came out earlier. You know, I noticed that President Trump made sure that they didn't have to use medical masks. You know, he put out an order. I think that's how it was done. He put out an order that masks that you buy that they had millions of industrial masks that they couldn't sell because, or even give away because they'd be sued if somebody got the virus wearing one of those masks. So he put out an order that and they were every bit as good as the medical masks. They just weren't tested for medical purposes.
Yeah, but I thought he said he didn't want to wear them.
No, he doesn't. When all the people that are there, you know, I'm sure are thoroughly tested when he gives his daily briefing, you know. I'm sure that's all taken care of. But as I say, he made an order that those masks were to be considered just as good because the doctors said they were. So that's how that happened. So I have a couple of those that I keep in the car, just like yours.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, guys.
Well,
I think I'm going to go ahead and get out of here and grab some lunch. That's all done. So
I missed my lunch at 2:30.
Anyways, we have some beets that we made for lunch. Also, beets are high in nitrites. All right. So if you eat a lot of nitrites, it makes your body produce nitrites, which will help deter the coronavirus. And
oh, really?
Let's see. I was wondering, does anybody know what the new slang is from the young people out there? What this coronavirus is?
No.
It's the Rona, is what I've heard.
It's yeah, from what I've heard, it's called boomer removers.
No, boomer doomers.
Hey guys,
Okay,
we're going to say
guys.
goodbye and we're going to go have lunch. So you take care. Good to see all of you. Great meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, cheerio, Betty. Cheerio, Ken.
Bye-bye, Kim, Betty.
Yep, see you guys.
Hey, Bill,
Yeah, Bob.
don't forget you pee red.
Oh yeah, the beets are wonderful for that. And you know, with the coronavirus going around, I've been working out in the yard, going underneath the shrub brush and everything, seeing if I can get a tick to fall on me. That way I'd have some Lyme disease to go around with my corona. All right, guys, see you later. Good talking to everybody. N0MID.
All right, Bill, take care.
Talking about that, you know, I ordered my my groceries from Walmart. You know, went for the pickup, but the guy said there's a few things we don't have on your list. He said one is the salad, the other one is the flour. He said, and we haven't got any Guinness or beer. I said, no beer. He said, well, we've got plenty of Corona. It's the only beer we've got. Everything else is gone. Right, see you all. I'm going to get myself a little bit of lunch.
I totally agree.
Hey, good.
Yeah.
Thanks seeing everybody.
Take care, Richard.
Cheerio.
Go ahead and stop,
Cheerio.
I guess. It sounds like we're winding down.
See you guys.
Is that good to go?
W0TET, are you there?
Yeah, I think so.
So how you doing? I haven't talked to you forever.
I know. No, I'm doing a lot better.
Good.
Been busy.
Well, you got to check into these nets once in a while. Give
Well,
you
you know,
something to do.
Well, been so sick over the last couple of years, things got away from me, so I've been working my tail off getting things caught back up. I hope.
Yeah, I'm not bored at staying home.
No, it's kind of a change.
Yeah, you don't have many excuses for doing the honeydews.
Oh yeah, I got some pretty good ones too. I still got a long ways to go, but it's coming.
I got a comment for Monday. I'd like to know how to show slides, you know, pictures that I'm taking of activities that I'm doing around the house. Speaking of that, Bob, and so let's schedule that for Monday night, I guess. So you can show me how to do it.
Generally, if you can put a picture on your computer screen, okay?
Yeah.
Just minimize, say do anything. If you put a picture on, minimize it, okay, with the minimize thing, and then go down to share screen at the bottom. And when you say share screen, that will bring up that picture on everybody's screen.
Okay, I gotta take a picture of my garage door with the new bars on it.
That sounds like a good idea.
It's just one of those byproducts of being broken into at 3 a.m.
One of the things that might be easy is when you have more than one screen on this thing, you can have one screen for your Zoom and then share another screen. I think Kevin had 2 cameras, but when you have 2 screens, that's another way to easily share.
How do you do that?
What?
He means 2 monitors.
Oh, 2 monitors. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but Kevin had 2 cameras. Kevin has a camera that he showed us that showed, I think it was the front of your entrance, Kevin?
Yeah, that was pretty nice, yeah.
Well, gentlemen, have we come to the end?
I think so. You want
I think so.
to X this out? So May